Watch out for the big trick that these Ivy Leagues are playing, which is they have billions and billions of dollars of endowments. And they're all pretending that the withdrawal of elements of their funding mean, and wait for it, always they say, this cut is terrible. It means that we're going to have to close our cancer research department. No. Don't let's fall for this. Cut the rancid Middle Eastern radicalization department. Do that.
You say communism is not spreading, but there may be socialism spreading in New York City.
I just heard this news.
That the next mayor of New York is Zohran Mamdani, who is most likely. It's not definite, but that's what all the indications are tonight. What does that say about the city that you live in, the largest city in the country, the state of the Democratic Party?
It's heartbreaking. I love New York. It's one of the great cities of the world. I moved there 5 years ago, and this news that we got a few minutes ago, if it is confirmed, I don't know, maybe I'll move to California.
Got plenty of room here.
But I'll tell you.
Gavin Newsom welcomes you with open arms.
I'm not sure. He might not count me a win. But if I may make a serious point about this, there are many unlearned lessons from history, and there are many unlearned lessons from the 20th century. But the biggest unlearned lesson is this, and it's played out in this race. Consider the fact that in the middle of the 20th century, there were two horrific death cult ideologies: Nazi fascism, Soviet communism. These both caused more death than any other ideologies in history. But here's the thing, we've learned much of the lessons of what happens when you see fascism coming. I mean, everybody thinks they see fascism everywhere. Maybe that's just an early warning system, and sometimes it's just people who are hysterical. But pretty much, I think, in the West, particularly in this country, we know what fascism looks like. We know what a far-right ideology looks like. We know, for instance, that if people start playing dark games of racial superiority and things like that, we know, we have inbuilt a don't you do that again, we know where that leads. Mm-hmm. The great unlearned lesson of the 20th century is that the left, by comparison, has never had such a reckoning moment. Whereas we know how you get to Auschwitz, roughly, pretty roughly, but we know. How do you get to the Gulag? I mean, you get there somehow, but the left, and I think the broader culture, has never worked out what the gradations of this are, so that you have, let's say that's the political center. Sorry, I'm doing it the wrong way around for you, but let's say that's the political center, and that's the Gulag. You go socialism, communitarianism of some kind, collectivism. And all of these are still totally acceptable parts of the political spectrum. But like somewhere you get to the horrors of communism, somewhere you get to the horrors of the 20th century in Central and Eastern Europe and many other parts of the world. How? Where? Where's the point?
Yeah.
And that's where somebody like the man who I hope is not, but maybe the mayor of New York, that's where they play around. They play around in this incredibly dark, unclear territory, which their political side has still not properly litigated.
Yeah.
And so they can say things like, I'm a socialist.
A democratic socialist.
A democratic socialist. Find me anywhere in the West that would accept somebody who called themselves a democratic fascist. I mean, find me that person. Of course we wouldn't. We wouldn't tolerate that for a moment. Nobody would vote for that. I mean, like 5 nutters somewhere on the Upper East Side, maybe. But no, that wouldn't get any popular play. But democratic socialism, it all sounds so nice. Oh, okay, in which case, at what point do you get to the not nice bit?
Yeah. And it's interesting also that it seems like for so many years the Democratic establishment has worked to stop that from becoming the thing. And you look at, in some ways, there's an argument that the DNC has almost rigged their primaries well, first off, there was no primary to get Kamala Harris. But then, Bernie Sanders sort of kept back against Biden, against Hillary Clinton. They've tried to keep that power center, the pragmatic, more centrist power center. And here, the Democratic establishment got all behind Andrew Cuomo, and it may not have worked. I mean, Bill Clinton, Michael Bloomberg, all those folks. It shows that maybe the real energy, at least in some areas, is on that left. But okay, that's a whole other thing that we could get into. But let's talk about your book, because the book is fantastic. And one of the things you talk about in your book is that some folks, including potentially the next mayor, on October 8th were rooting for Hamas and not rooting for Israel. And the book starts by talking about Israel. Let's talk about, though, this death cults phrase, which I think has gotten so much attention, and sort of define how you see this struggle, not only between good and evil, but people who love life and people who love death. How do you sort of square that? Do you think that Israel has gone too far at times and needs to be walked back?
Well, if I may say so, most of the criticism in the Western media and from, let's say, many politicians is there's been too many innocent deaths in Gaza, and it's got to stop. Okay, that's broadly speaking the view. I always have a challenge to these people, which I simply say to them, fine, tell me how you would achieve the following. Let's say we're in New York. Let's say that New Jersey fires rockets for years. Let's say that for 18 years, the government there has used all money coming in to enrich themselves and to build a vast tunnel network in which they can store munitions and hostages and much more. And let's say that right next door to where you're living, this very densely well built up terrorist infrastructure invaded you, killed hundreds and hundreds of your people, took 250 more hostage. Tell me how you would operate in that terrain to ensure that you kill or capture all the leaders of the people who did this and wipe out their ability to ever rule that entity again. And secondly, how you get back 250 hostages. And I have yet to hear a critic of the Israeli government's actions give me a viable plan for how you would get back the hostages and how you would punish and kill the people who did that. Because, just again, if you extrapolate out the population of Israel, about 9 million, to a population the size of the United States, this was equivalent on October the 7th to some 44,000 Americans being killed in one day and another 10,000 Americans being taken hostage. And nobody from left or right, Democrat, Republican, or anyone else has been able to persuade me that if that happened in this country, we would not tear up the earth to get those hostages back.
Yeah. But But do you think the objective of defeating Hamas, is that possible? Is that possible as a goal?
Well, it's very interesting. Again, there's a type of criticism of the actions of the Israeli government and armies since the 7th of October, which, by the way, I should have said, in terms of fighting a war in a heavily built-up civilian area, the best analyses that we can get, because it's not easy, because everything, as you probably know, all of the death toll figures are the Gaza Health Ministry, which is Hamas. And I mean, the idea that Hamas has a health ministry is itself. But also all the figures come from that. But let's just concede, yes, a lot of people have been killed. But the best analyses of somebody like Spencer at West Point, John Spencer, is that it's probably a ratio of something like 1 terrorist to 1 civilian. Now, losing 1 civilian for 1 terrorist is terrible, but it is infinitely better than any operation the British Army, the American Armed Forces, or others have been. Most of the operating procedure of other Western armies is roughly 3 to 4 civilians for every 1 target. It's high, but the Israelis have massively outperformed our own past experience in Iraq, in Fallujah, and elsewhere, in slightly similar terrain. So just on that, it's very important to keep that in mind. As for the ideology, I have yet to be persuaded that there is something so extraordinary about Hamas as a force that their ideology can never be wiped out. We have seen many death cult ideologies in history.
The ones you mentioned.
The ones I mentioned. Or let's just take one that, let's take Imperial Japan. The citizens of this country and states like this were told by many people in the 1940s there was nothing you could do. You could fight them. There was no way you would ever eradicate the ideology of the worship of the emperor and so on. And just consider what we knew about Japan as this country was fighting. I mean, we knew that this was an army that eventually had pilots who were willing to die whilst flying their planes into an American ship. Consider the fact that in places like Iwo Jima, American soldiers, young men, were fighting people who were fanatics very similar. Different ideology, but a very similar type of fanaticism. If you'd have said then, in 2025, Japan will be more than within the community of nations. Indeed, will have been for decades. Will be a great success as a society.
Business leaders
Democracy. In everything. But you would have been able to find people, and you could find people, right up until the surrender, that again, in Japan, was inconceivable before the emperor was forced by this country and its military to cease. You would have found people who say there's nothing we can do to wipe that out. I do not believe there is something so unique about Hamas that among all the death cults we've seen throughout history, this one is uniquely virile. And I would just add that, look at the success of the IDF since October the 7th against all of these people, the individuals, the groups. It turns out that all the people that on American college campuses and on British college campuses they mourned so much or they admired so much, they're all gone. And I've got news for those students, by the way, in America and Britain and elsewhere who've spent the last 18 or so months dressing up in Palestinian terrorist chic and
Queers for Palestine.
Queers for Palestine and so on. I mean, these at some point, I hope these young people grow up, but they've got a heck of a shock because everybody that they have claimed to admire, apart from being rapists and murderers and sadists, are also now dead.
Is that
so? They can continue to parade with admiration for Sinwar and Nasrallah and all the rest, but they're all encountering their 72 virgins, which is, of course.
Well, when you mention Japan, we should give them credit for their greatest export of all, which is Shohei Ohtani, for those of us here in town. But in terms of those college protests, which you write about in the book, one thing I'm curious about is we saw so many of them last year, and we see so few of them right now. What happened? Why is that?
I do write about the student protests because it's very important. At the same time, I think it's important not to overstate. At the same time, you can't overstate and you shouldn't understate it. But these are elite institutions that turn out to be the most rotten. And this is a very big challenge for all of us in the rest of the West. It isn't the case that, technical colleges have had students dressing up as Hamas for the last 20 months or whatever. It isn't the case that in good community colleges, these young people are going off and deciding actually they're going to litigate a conflict in a...
Because they got to work. A lot
They
of
got to
people
work.
in community college, they got jobs.
They're going to become useful people.
Right.
And it's a problem we have in all of our countries in the West at the moment with elite institutions. And this is a bit of a surprise in some ways. I mean, everybody knows from the 1960s and everything, and again, it's relevant to where we are. You know, there were, in the 68ers, we saw that there were some liberal campuses, Berkeley and elsewhere, where you get the wildest excesses. But even then, we didn't have the kind of putrefaction we see now. I mean, in 1968, it was still not cool to actually call for genocide on campus. You know, it was still not the done thing in 1968 to chase Jewish students across campus shouting, "Go back to Poland," or say, "I hope that Hamas gets you next," which is what's happening at Columbia and Yale and Princeton the other week. When another terrorist was killed, the students start chanting "Glory to our martyrs." Who is our exactly in that case?
Yeah.
The martyrs of Princeton?
Yeah.
So this is a very serious defect but it's being taught. And there's a guy I quote in the book who is really, it's an extraordinary thing that this young guy said. He's a student at Columbia University, and he said, I'm a first generation, low income, first member of my family to go to university. And he says, when I got to this university, I learned about the rich history of protest. And I remember thinking, when it kicks off again, I want to be at the center of it. Now, he then says, you know, so when October 7th happened, I realized we were on. And then before you know it, he's living in a tent in the middle of campus screaming at Jews. But just consider what has gone wrong in that. I would like to think that this young guy can at some point deprogram from the death cult he's found himself worshipping. But consider that actually what has gone wrong there is at the institutional level. Why is an American university partially funded by taxpayer money telling a student coming up, being given the best chance they have in their life as the first member of their family to get that chance, that to be a student at a university in America in the 2020s, your best use of your time is to be turned into a radical automaton? Why are we telling them why are they encouraged to believe they should become activists instead of doing something with their lives, contributing to the world, contributing to their country? This is something we need to deprogram the universities, but that is why.
And not only activists, but activists for a different country, not even dealing with issues around the university.
I mean, you know, it's amazing that some kid who's, you know, just got to an Ivy League suddenly seems to think they're an expert in urban warfare in a far-off continent. But this is something that needs to be tackled. My own belief is that what the Trump administration has been doing is absolutely right, and I'd like to see them do more. I think, by the way, I was talking about this with somebody from Harvard the other day who thought the president had gone in with a rather heavy hand by stripping their charitable status and so on, and stopping the access of foreign students. But I think most American taxpayers are rather surprised to discover that they are supplementing the income of Harvard to the extent that it is bringing in 30% foreign students. I'm not sure the American taxpayer is aware that they're underwriting not the education of Americans, but the education of the world. And these institutions were not set up for this. I think that the Trump administration's policies, yes, they've been heavy-handed in places, yes, they'll definitely get things wrong. But by the way, watch out for the big trick that these Ivy Leagues are playing, which is they have billions and billions of dollars of endowments. And they're all pretending that the withdrawal of elements of their funding mean, and wait for it, always they say, this cut is terrible. It means that we're going to have to close our cancer research department. No. Don't let's fall for this. Cut the rancid Middle Eastern radicalization department. Do that. Cut off the limb of the whatever it is, lesbian interpretive dance degree class. Get rid of the stuff that's no use. Get rid of the stuff that's no use, that's bogus degrees, where students get heavily into debt for degrees that'll get them nowhere job-wise. Cut that off, but don't let's fall for this thing of them pretending, oh yeah, it's the research into cancer in kittens that we're going to have to stop. No, I mean, it's so transparent what they're doing.
It's 2025. America's debt is over $37 trillion, and the dollar just had its worst crash since 1973. That puts your savings and your family's future at risk. That's why we trust Alpha Omega Gold, a company that stands unapologetically with Israel and supports Stand Tall Israel. Visit ao.gold/stand to claim your free precious metals wayfinder guide or call 1-855-426-4653 today. Protect your future before it's too late.